Hey, it's Benji Cole, son of Al Cole from CBS Radio, welcoming you to another edition of People of Distinction. The talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. Run to our website, peopleofdistinction.org, for more info, or you can email me directly at benji@alcoleenterprises.com. And on the line with us today, we have Susan Smith. We'll be discussing her book, Katie's Wish, available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And Susan was brought to People of Distinction today by some of the best movers in the business, Westwood Books Publishing. If you have a book that you'd like moved, move it through Westwood Books. You can find them at westwoodbookspublishing.com. And guys, I am so excited to have Susan here on the line with us because, listen, the book that we're going to be discussing, Katie's Wish, all right, it's a classic story of good versus evil. But more importantly, right, and it's a fictional narrative, of course, but what's great about it is the underlying message, right? One of the biggest themes about it is really such a relatable message and really an applicable message to everybody that encounters this powerful book, okay? It's really, as I stated, a story about good versus evil, but more importantly, it's about how other people's actions shouldn't corrupt you or influence you, right? And it doesn't dictate who you are. And that, I think, is such a great and powerful message that, again, can be applied to every single one of us on our path in life. And listen, Susan is going to be able to explain all this much better than I ever could, okay? So we have her here on the line. So without further ado, Susan, first and foremost, thank you so much for being a guest with us on People of Distinction. How are you today?
I am good, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, listen, we're really looking forward to having you, so thank you for being here. Now, Susan, before we jump into the book, let's hold off slightly. Tell our listening audience a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, I'm a teacher. I've been teaching for over 30 years, and I actually retired a few times, but missed the children, so I went back. I absolutely love it, and I don't think there's another profession that you can be in that you have such an impact on others' lives. So it's just really rewarding. I also am a mother of 3 adult children and 4 very active grandchildren, and love to travel. I've been quite a few countries. China is one of my favorites that I've been back and forth. Have several friends from there, and it's actually my friend from China that came to stay with me that encouraged me to actually publish Katie's Wish. So I've had a very, I think, exciting and full life, and I'm looking forward to what the rest of my life brings.
Absolutely. Well, listen, first and foremost, thank you very much for sharing. Secondly, Susan, I can definitely attest, being someone, as we discussed on the pre-screening call, being someone that has taught for 4 years, and my significant other, she's taught for about 15 years and still teaches high school. Listen, it is something that absolutely is incredibly rewarding. I mean, when you start to see your students really grabbing in, being so attentive to what you're teaching and utilizing that, I don't know if there's any better feeling. It's absolutely fantastic. And being from that side of the spectrum, and again, having someone very close to me that has taught for so long, I can attest that teachers don't get nearly enough credit for the amount of work that they do. So it's a very tough field, but I applaud you for doing it. And it's understandable why you retired and then came back to work a few times, right? You do happen to miss the children that you teach, and they become part of your lives that way. So it's such a beautiful thing that you've reflected. Now, Susan, let's jump right into the book, okay? Katie's Wish. Give us a brief synopsis of the novel, please.
Okay, well, Katie's Wish is a book where Katie, she's about a 3rd grader, is taken from her home and school and friends and everything that she's known and loved, and she suddenly finds herself in this aunt's house who lives in a cabin in the backwoods in northern Michigan, and she's from a city and never been around the country that much, and everything is different to her. And also, when she was driven there, it was late at night, and when she gets there, it's just a cabin with a bunch of trees around, so she has no idea where she's at or how she could get out if she wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
And she finds this aunt to be very caustic and cruel, even cruel at times, and gives her lots of chores that a third grader should not have to do. She's cooking, washing clothes, chopping wood, this kind of thing. And her only friends were the animals around her, and she made lots of friends with the animals. Her best friend turns out to be a fish in the creek where she has to run down to and gather or tote water back up to the cabin. And he eventually turns her into a fish, and they go off on an adventure to solve her dilemma with the ant. And that's basically the beginning of the book, and I'm not going to give the ending away.
Absolutely. Very smart move. That's fantastic. Such a great journey there. And, I'm assuming, as you stated, right, it follows this young girl. And as we discussed in the pre-screening call, sounds like a children's book, but really, guys, something that has been appreciated by all ages, literally. So definitely don't stop there. It doesn't matter how old you are. Anybody can really partake and enjoy in this. Now, as we go into the title, Susan, talk to us about, it's very straightforward, right? Katie's wish. We know Katie is the main character. We're assuming she has a wish or some sort that she makes. But talk to our listening audience. Why did you decide to name your book that title, and how did you develop and create it?
Well, Katie's wish has almost as long a history as I do, because I started at when my children were very little, and I'm from a family of storytellers. My grandmother, my mother, my aunts, they all told stories and wrote stories and poetry. And until I was 8, we had no television, so that was our entertainment.
Oh, wow.
And so that's a natural thing that came. And so I was telling stories to my children always at night, and this was just one of the stories I told them. And then I would tell it to my students. When my children grew up, I was telling it to the students in my classroom, and they always would beg me to tell the story again, but it didn't have a name. It was called, and this was the students that called it that, the fish story, and they would say, please tell us the fish story again. And then I had been in an accident years ago, and I didn't tell this earlier about my history, but I have a brace, and the kids can kind of understand that I can understand them, because I also have limitations, and if they feel like they have limitations and they see that I've overcome them, they can, that helps them. But absolutely. I had to have surgery, and I was home, and I'm a very active person, so I don't do well sitting in a chair for long, and I decided I was just going to write the story down that I kept telling, and so that's the first time it ever was on paper. About 5 years later, I typed it up, and my friend from China was visiting, and she said, that's a really good story. You need to publish it. So we got on the computer together, and we found a publisher, and it was published for the first time. But I didn't really care for how it turned out, so I didn't really promote it at that point in time, and it wasn't until 2018 that I actually republished it. And the name Katie's Wish actually came from my niece Katie, who was the first child that read the story to tell me if it sounded good after it was on paper, to tell me if it was good. And so the wish comes from, she wishes that, not that she was in a different place, and she's not even wishing that her mother and father were alive, though she misses them terrible. But her wish was that her aunt would be nicer. And so that's Katie's wish. And so that's what the whole story is about, and how the relationship between Katie and her aunt developed.
Here on the line with Susan Smith, we're discussing her book, Katie's Wish, available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Now, as we go off of that, we know about the story, we know about the title, we started to go into the inspiration. I mean, we know about what inspired you to write this book. Now, talk to our listening audience, Susan. When did you realize that you wanted to be a writer, that you wanted to embark upon a creative journey of this magnitude? I mean, you talk about how you come from a family of storytellers, right? So maybe it was already bred in you that way, but when did you first realize you wanted to embark upon this journey?
I actually think it was when I was about 5 years old, and
Wow.
I turned a big box upside down and put a chair beside it and put a bunch of papers on that cardboard, and I made myself a desk, and then I crumbled paper up all over the place and threw some on the ground and put a bunch of pencils in front of me and pretended I was writing. So I think that was the first time that happened. As far as being a teacher, in which really connects with my writing, because one of the things when I did go into teaching, and I was not just out of high school going into college. I was actually 34 when I went back to teach, and I had
Hmm.
three children, and so not to teach, but to go to college, and so that all was kind of a slow, kind of start.
Right.
But I didn't really want to be a teacher. I thought that would be so boring. And I would write stories, and I gave them to my son's teacher, and she would read them to the class and tell me how good they were. And then she said, you need to go back to college. You need to be a teacher. You have the personality to relate to children. And it was this teacher and a couple other teachers that just kept encouraging me until I did go back to college and I did start writing. So even though they're different careers, they kind of intermingle. And
Hmm.
I also knew from the very beginning that teaching was where I was going to get a lot of my ideas from. And I get my ideas from my students and my work. And Katie's Wish has an awful lot of my background in it. The soap making, the wood stove, and different things like that actually did come from my background. But it all just evolves, and
Absolutely.
and you never really sit down and think, I'm going to do this. It just sort of happens. And as you said, my background, my family, I'm sure was a great influence, especially my mother, um, who was my biggest fan, by the way.
That is awesome. Susan, talk to us about what was a highlight, or not even maybe what was a highlight for you in writing this book, but also maybe one thing that surprised you on your journey of writing this particular narrative.
Well, writing's the easy part, and so I'm not sure that's the highlight. But when you finish a book, it's always, that's always quite a nice accomplishment. But the
Absolutely.
surprising thing for me was to find out that I also had to market it. It didn't just sell
And
itself,
it just sell
it's
itself,
done.
right?
And so I think the highlight of that process was when I uh, went to LA and pitched my book um, to I think 10 agents from different um, producing companies like Netflix, and they didn't tell us who we were talking to. They only told us the different companies, and I think Disney was there too. And that, was very exciting to me. It was not anything that I expected that I would get results from, but I just thought it was such an honor to be there and such a neat experience to be talking with all of these people
Absolutely.
and getting information, learning from them.
You know
And
that.
also, and I don't know that that's actually what helped, um, but I do know that Red Wagon right now it has my book, and they are, um, looking at it. So I don't know what will happen with that, but that's all kind of a bonus and exciting for me. Um, Writing the book though is what really is um, my love, because I see my students, and all through the many years of teaching, I've seen my students get excited when I'm telling the story or reading the story to them, and their jaws kind of drop at the very end, the last paragraph, and then they'll say, I knew it. I knew that was going to happen, or something like this. So
Right.
they would come back to me, and for instance, I know this is about Katie's Wish, but this book that I'm just now writing, Edgar the Elephant, I read that to my students this last spring, and the comment was, oh, but you didn't do this. You need to do this. And I actually took their advice, and I changed my story.
Wow.
And so that inspires them to write and to realize they all have stories inside them. So I know I've kind of got off this
No,
topic,
thank you for sharing. I mean, what a great story. What a great piece to put out there. And listen, we're definitely going to get into your other books. Last question, really, as we tie up Katie's Wish, is, I'm sure there's a lot of different messages and a lot of different themes that can be pulled from it. But in your estimation, what is one central message, central theme that you're really wanting to say to your readers about this book?
To not let others change who you are in a negative way, but use your own strength inside, that whether, it comes from your parents. In Katie's case, it came from her parents and from God. To rise above that and to pull them away from their problems, and maybe even influence them to be a better person, and see where that relationship goes. So I think that's the main thing. It's very touching, I think, when you can see good coming from bad.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, it's such a great message, and listen, something that, as we've stated, is applicable to every single person. So guys, get out there, pick up this book, Katie's Wish, by Susan Smith, available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. But as she's already started to go into, and as I stated before, guys, that's not all, okay? We've just begun. Now, that's the only one that's published at this moment. As she stated, there's one that she's just getting ready to complete. It's almost done, still in creation, so you can't pick it up just yet, but it will be out later on this year, hopefully within the next couple of months. So keep on the lookout for that. It's called Edgar the Elephant. Now, Susan, talk to us briefly about that narrative, please.
Okay, well, Edgar the Elephant is another story where there was abuse going on, but this time it was with an elephant and the rest of the animals in this rundown zoo.
Mm-hmm.
And the main character is Pete, and he's the brains of the operation, and he has what he calls his boy Robbie. And they go to this zoo some of the other birds had told him about, and they encounter all these animals, and then they meet Edgar, who touches their heart, and he is sad, and they're so upset that he's so sad. So Pete decides that he will help him. And so I'm not going to give the story away, but Pete and Robbie go ahead and help Edgar gain his freedom. And so I'm not going to tell you how that is, but that's what the story is about. And so my inspiration for writing this story, actually I was in another country, and my friends took me to a zoo, and the zoo was just very depressing because the animals looked, the ones that I saw out front weren't quite as bad, but I walked behind a building and I saw a horse with the ribs sticking out, and it was just, and I'm pretty sure the horse was there for working, and it was, so that's kind of where this story came from.
Mm-hmm.
And made it into, a kid's story. And then also, there's a method of writing where if you can't think of an idea, you put several words in a hat or box or whatever you have, and stir them up, and you draw out only like 5 to 7 words, and then you create a story around that. And so that's kind of how this started, but with the idea in mind of the zoo.
Well, that's really interesting. I mean, that's a creative approach.
It was kind of, it really starts your mind to thinking, because my words were elephant, parrot, hammer, light bulb, candy bar, and I'm not sure of the other two. But anyway, if you read the book, you will see how those are used in the book. And so that's how that book started. And again, I wrote that book many years ago on paper, but I never published it. And last year I read it to my students, and I read it to my grandson. And my grandson doesn't, he's a very intelligent young man, but he's not into reading that much. But he read the story, and he looked up at me, and he said, "You've got to publish this." So that's why I decided, okay, I would do it for Spencer. Yeah, so I'm very fortunate as a writer to have students that are right there handy for me to try my stories out on to see if they're any good or throw them out. And not all my stories have been, so successful, and they will tell you, that's why I love teaching students, because they haven't learned yet to be polite and
right.
Tell you untruths about what you're doing.
Yeah, children will always give you their unbiased opinion, right? I mean, they'll just give it to you straight, which is can hurt sometimes, but at the same time, it's always good, and it's coming from a good place. Now, we are running out of time, so we don't have a bunch of time to go into the other two, but you also are working on 2 other books as well. Guys, she's working on a sequel to Katie's Wish. Be on the lookout for that one. Doesn't have a title just yet, but that's also in the mix. And then we have another one that she's working on called Come Back Grandma. Okay, both of those, as I stated, still in creation, as is Edgar the Elephant, but you got to get out there. You got to pick up all these books, okay? And, of course, do yourself a favor and start with Katie's Wish. That's really what brought us here today. That's the big focus that we really wanted to stay on. Available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, Katie's Wish by Susan Smith. Do yourself a favor, get out there and pick up these books. Keep your eye on the lookout for her next ones coming up as well. Susan, this has been absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for being a guest with us today on People of Distinction.
Oh, thank you so much also. I really enjoyed talking with you. You make it very easy.